Hello, good morning and welcome to Ireland AM on Virgin Media 1.
It is great to have you with us. It's Monday the 7th of October. Here's what's coming up.
Yeah, we've got lots coming up on today's show and it is the 7th of October. It marks 1 year since the Hamas attack on Israel. We'll be getting the latest headlines on the conflict in the Middle East. There has been bombing in Beirut overnight. That's coming up at 7:15.
At 7:45, we're going to be speaking to the Clinical Director of Allergy Ireland about what causes allergies and how to treat them. This follows on from a segment we did last week that Alan has got us into a lot of trouble about this morning, so we're going to be discussing that and
Duffing you in it, love it.
The concerns and how it is to be safe looking after people with allergies.
Absolutely, we're going to be talking about all of that very shortly. At 9:20, we're going to be speaking to writer Michael Harding about his brand new memoir.
Alan, now what else have you got to get us in trouble?
Yeah. Well, Tommy, lots coming up, including pannier puff pastry in the kitchen. A psychic is going to be performing aura readings. And we're going to be getting the latest gadgets with Colin Baker. That's later on this morning. Now, Deric is finding out hibernation. He's just come out of hibernation over the weekend. Good morning, Deric.
Just about out of hibernation. Good morning. Well, ahead of our trips to County Wexford and County Carlow this week, we've landed down here in County Kildare. Now, following that wet one we had through the west, the south and in across the southwest, it looks like a better picture out there today. That mixture of sunshine and scattered showers, although we are expecting some heavier rain through the southeast later on today, so not out of the woods in terms of that wet stuff. Now, Grey Abbey here in County Kildare is where we're at this morning, and today we're talking all about hedgehogs. Now, not actually a native species, which many people think they are, but we're going to be finding out all about these beautiful spiky creatures, including why you shouldn't give them milk, and I'll be doing it in my best David Attenborough voice as the hedgehog hops into the leafy hedgerows. That's all to come live here from County Kildare. It must be a full moon, is it?
You need to be chilled to handle Irish weather. That's why Chill sponsor weather updates on Virgin Media 1.
Thank you, Ger, and a very good morning. Broadcasting live here from Grey Abbey down here in County Kildare. Coming up a little bit later on this morning, we're finding out all about hedgehogs and how we can help them in the run-up to their hibernation. So that's all to come live. 9:35, so a little bit to go on that one. Now we're on to the 7th of October. Martin Rigney with us at Canvas this morning. So let's take an opening look at how it's shaping up for the day ahead and following a wet weekend, especially through the west and into the south, through the southwest in particular, where we had that status orange for Cork, Kerry and Waterford out to this morning. In fact, we're still looking at a showery one through parts of Cork and Kerry and around Killarney and Mill Street at the moment. Parts of Tip not escaping either through Care there and Carrigan, sure, but elsewhere it is holding drier and a lot more settled now in that south sea easterly airflow. So pushing our way, in fact, through the day, not a bad one in store for the majority of the country, in fact, because we will see a pretty decent and a dry one. Good October sunshine out there today, with the exception really of that southeastern corner today, where we will see rain, and in fact some of that heavy through parts of southern Leinster in across southeastern Munster as well, with top values of around 14 to 18 degrees. Into tonight then, that mixture of cloud cover and some well scattered showers. Clear spells will develop across those early morning areas with the overnight lows there back around 7 to 11 degrees. So that's how it's shaping up here in a dry and settled Grey Abbey in County Kildare at the moment. Back again live at 7:35. Good evening, Slán.
You need to be chilled to handle Irish weather. That's why Chill sponsor weather updates on Virgin Media 1.
Now, coming up, we're going to be discussing the latest developments in the Middle East, where Irish troops remain steadfast as the Israeli army pushes across the Lebanese border.
Yes, we're going to be getting all the details on that just in a few minutes. Stay with us.
Welcome back. It's time to take a look at this morning's papers. We're going to start with the Daily Mail. The headline there, failed asylum seekers being tipped off on Garda raids to deport them. It goes on to say that the tips are coming from officials in the International Protection Accommodation Service.
The Sun leads with Russian Dáil. Taoiseach Simon Harris has tried to play down revelations of a Russian agent in the Dáil or the Seanad. It's claimed the mystery politician fell for a honey trap and was tasked with acting for Vladimir Putin, but committed no crime.
The Herald's headline says overcrowding may have had a role in cell shiv death. Prison officers said they continually raise concerns about overcrowding in prisons before a man was stabbed to death in Cloverhill on Saturday.
The Examiner leads with protests as Israel ramps up Gaza and Beirut attacks. Pro-Palestinian protests took place in cities across the world while Israel bombarded Beirut with the heaviest offensive yet in Lebanon yesterday, as the 1 year has passed since the Hamas attack sent the Middle East into a deadly spiral of violence.
The Star leads with staring down the barrel of hell. It shows a picture of an Israeli tank outside Irish troops' UN base in Lebanon and states that this is the moment Irish soldiers stare down the barrel of a deadly Israeli tank.
And the Mirror also goes with in the line of fire.
UN warns Israel over safety of Irish peacekeepers. Fears are mounting for the safety of 33 Irish troops trapped and surrounded at a UNIFIL outpost where fighting between the Israeli army and Hezbollah has intensified. That's the front page of the Irish Independent today.
The Irish Times states Irish peacekeepers steadfast as Israel advances into Lebanon. It goes on to say Irish soldiers in Lebanon remain steadfast in their determination and resilience to fulfil the mission, the Defence Forces said yesterday.
Now we're going to stay with that story. It dominates the papers this morning. It's dominating the news cycle. The UN has described the position of Israeli tanks near the Irish outpost as, quote, extremely dangerous development.
Yes, and joining us with that story and everything else that's making the news is Louise Byrne, political correspondent with the Irish Mirror. Good morning to you, Louise. And obviously major concerns now about our Irish troops in South Lebanon.
Absolutely. And I mean, if reading the Irish Independent this morning, and some of the families were speaking to the Irish Independent under the condition of anonymity, of course, but they were saying how worried that they are for their loved ones who are in Lebanon. And as we know, this has been going on since last Monday. Israeli troops positioned themselves close to the outpost in between Lebanon and Israel, known as the Blue Line, and that's where the Irish peacekeepers have been working for decades, keeping the peace in Lebanon. But the 33 troops are at this outpost now and they can't leave. They're bunkered down. They have rations, but you know, rations only last for so long. So the Irish Independent saying maybe a week's rations left. There's plenty of water, and you know, it's very frightening for them, I'm sure. And if you look at my own paper this morning, the Irish Mirror, we have those pictures of the
tank outside
at the outpost. Yeah, and I mean, it must be very worrying. And at a time when, you know, Israel's firing over the Blue Line one way, Hezbollah are firing back the other way, and the Irish peacekeepers are trapped effectively at this outpost, and it's been widely condemned. And President Michael T. Higgins, with a really strong statement actually on Saturday evening, saying that it's absolutely outrageous that there is this threat to the UN and to UNIFIL members. And the UN also coming out, like you said, Muireann, last night and saying that this is a very dangerous position and it's a very worrying time. But we do know that Taoiseach and the Taoiseach are both speaking over the weekend, saying that there's no plans to withdraw the troops and they are there in the peacekeeping capacity.
Can I just ask you, sorry, is where they are, is it marked UN peace? Is there a flag? Is it known that this is the area where they are, or is it undercover?
Well, the IDF said to the UN to withdraw the troops, so they know well that they are there. And they've said to them, take out your troops. You know, this is ours now. And the UN and UNIFIL are staying where they are, and they're being really strong, because don't forget, this is a community that a lot of these peacekeepers have been in for months, years. Ireland has had a position in Lebanon as part of the UNIFIL mission for decades now, and it's something that people hold very dearly. So this is rather frightening. So I mean, it seems very clear from those pictures in my own newspaper today that Israel know exactly what they are doing
and where they are. Of course, there's speaking in the Irish Independent as well today, a mother talking about her son who's over in Lebanon begging the government to get involved in this to try to get them home. It's 1 year on. We all know today marks the day that the Hamas attack happened on that Israeli music festival. And it's just gotten more and more violent, because if you've looked at the pictures this morning, Beirut is in flames again, and they launched an attack on Gaza again yesterday. Yeah,
and I think the videos coming out of Beirut are extraordinary, and you can just see these plumes of fire just exploding over the city. And I mean, it's hard to believe in some ways that it is a year since that desperate Hamas attack in Israel that killed 1,200 people. And it was awful, and it really marked the start of this very sad war. And it's hard to believe how it's escalated, how many countries that it's managed to drag in, how many people have died in the last year, how many children have died.
Isn't it, when you look at it, over 40,000 people have been killed in Gaza, 13,000 in Israel. God knows how many now in Israel. And when you hear those reports that like 10,000 people may be still buried in rubble, Like,
it's horrendous.
It's just horrendous.
And I think the real question is, how is this going to end? And I think people hoped this would have been over by now, but it's just no matter what happens, people just cannot seem to get through to Israel, to Hezbollah, to all sides involved in this war, that this is just, it's to no one's benefit, and it's so desperately sad. Now, we do know that Taoiseach is travelling to the White House this week, and he will have discussion with Joe Biden, and he kind of said last week, it was kind of put to him at a press conference, you know, will you be stern with Joe Biden? Will you make Ireland's position known on this? And he said, you know, you have to speak the truth to your friends, is what he said. So he said that he's going to be very straight up, very honest. Now, we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait and see how much of that meeting takes place in public, how much of it's in private. But I think there will be real pressure on Simon Harris. And he did issue a statement overnight, as did Taoiseach Micheál Martin, obviously condemning the Hamas attack on Israel. But the Taoiseach in particular is saying, you know, you can't look at this in isolation. It's very hard to separate what happened. That Hamas attack in Israel, which was obviously horrific, killed 1,200 people. But you cannot look at that in isolation from what's happening now, and it's no justification.
Everything is absolutely context, and of course you will be going over to lots of journalists travelling over to Washington this week with the Taoiseach. Just moving closer to home, there is that story this weekend where we're all going, sorry, there's a Russian agent inside in the Shannon or the Dáil or the Oireachtas.
Or do we know?
We don't know.
We don't know.
This was.
Are you all talking about this? I would assume.
Oh, my phone since Saturday night, since the Sunday Times put this up on Twitter, that this story, extraordinary story from John Mooney, that apparently there's a politician. We know it's a man. That's the only thing that we do
Louise,
know.
they all know you know everything. That's why your phone's been hopping.
Stop it.
Unfortunately, in this instance, I know nothing. I would love to know. And I'm not in Leinster House this week. I'm sure it's going to be the big topic of conversation in Leinster House, and I'm not going to be there. But an extraordinary story from John Mooney, the Taoiseach attempting to kind of play it down. And, you know, I was speaking to senior sources over the weekend, and they said, well, the Russians are always listening, and it would be naive to think that the Russians aren't always listening to us, but this is kind of a new departure.
It is. It just feels, sure, we're Ireland. What do you want over here? Go on away with
what
us.
do you want to do with us at all?
Another story here today, an e-scooter ban is coming in on public transport.
Yeah, this might be one that if anyone is commuting to work this morning, they might have been caught unawares, because this has kind of come very suddenly. But from today, you're not allowed to bring your e-scooters on Iron Road Air services, so the Dart, the trains, any of the buses, the local links, the Lewis. And this is due to concerns about the battery in the e-scooters. There's been incidents on the continent where these batteries have exploded, basically. And there's concerns about them being on public transport. Now, it's not the first place that the ban has come in. It's in place across the UK. I think it's in Germany as well. The incidents were in Madrid and Barcelona where the batteries exploded. So you would assume that they've also brought in this ban. Now, thankfully, we haven't had anything like this here, but it is, you know, a safety concern. And I think anyone travelling this morning with their e-scooters, could you imagine the grief now with bus drivers and everything this morning? What do you mean I can't take it on? Sorry, it's nothing to do with me.
Can you imagine bus drivers have it hard enough going, I'm not coming out taking your e-scooter off you as well. But there could be something else happening, because security guards are to begin operating on Dublin bus. Yeah, and I think this would be something that will be welcomed by an awful lot of commuters. So this has been introduced by Dublin Bus. There will be security guards on buses between certain times of the day. I think it's 2 o'clock in the day and 2 o'clock in the night between Sundays and Thursdays, and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 4 o'clock in the morning on Fridays and Saturdays on the weekend. And this follows a massive increase in the number of antisocial behaviours. Huge.
It's doubled. So in 2019, there was 500 incidents of antisocial behaviour recorded on Dublin Bus services, and that jumped up to over 1,000 last year. And so this is, I guess, something a lot of commuters will have looked for. And I mean, the bus, the Dart, they can be ropey enough in the middle of the day. There's oftentimes, you know, you might be commuting home in the afternoon, and sometimes it can actually be worse in the afternoon than it can be late at night.
So this is just Dublin Bus, but I'm like, wherever you live in the country, if you use public transport, what do you make of this? Security guards to begin operating? Is this something that you want to see? And what have you indeed seen when you were taking public transport that you're like, yeah, this has to happen? Because obviously the incidents are rising. 089 6 111 111. Have you seen antisocial behaviour on buses?
Who's going to pay for it? Because I'd say fares will probably go up on the back of it. If that's going to cost them a right.
We've been talking about it for ages, though, haven't we? Trying to get security
I mean, there
guards
has been these calls for like a dedicated transport
police.
And I mean that has been shot down time and time again. So this is an interesting development that I think will be welcomed.
I know. I wonder, does it work for people? You know, there is security on the Lewis and all that kind of stuff. Now, listen, I know you're trying to avoid doing this story today, but you're going to have to do it. And this is about.
She's going to Washington with the Taoiseach, and we're asking her this question.
So you can talk to him. Do you fart in front of your partner, Taoiseach? Because that's something you're going to ask Simon Harris this
Believe
week.
it or not, I might actually stick to like questions about the Middle East.
Right, yeah, I
what we're
wonder
gonna
if
be
you
doing
would.
over
What's
there.
this study?
Definitely. So this is a rather interesting research that has emerged, and it's about the benefits of passing wind in front of your loved ones.
Right.
And so this study found that most people wait between 2 and 6 months before they let one
Into
rip.
a relationship.
Yeah.
Into their relationship.
Okay, yeah.
Get to know them a little bit better.
A bit better, yeah.
Well,
but also, it's kind of, you know, sometimes it's involuntary. Do you know what I mean?
Listen,
There's nothing you can do about it.
It happens to the best of us.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what this relationship guru is saying, that once they get over the initial embarrassment, it can actually bring you closer.
In
What
what
do you
way?
think?
I don't know. I don't know.
You know all of their smells and sounds then.
Yeah.
What you make of
Well,
it?
come on, Miriam.
2 to 6
Do you?
months in front of. I would try not to, obviously.
But it happens.
I think it's happened to everyone. Let's be honest
Yes,
about
let's
this.
be
Come on,
happy.
let's be honest about this. 0896 111 111. Did you wait before getting that comfortable with your partner? And what's the situation now? I'm sure there's lots of people with Dutch ovens in their house sometimes when they wake up in the morning.
I'm telling you. I think it's natural. If it happens, it happens.
What about you?
Tommy,
Yes?
Of course I have. Tommy's sitting over there, big smile on his face. We know Tommy definitely has.
Oh, Lucy's never smelt a bad thing for him in his life. Now, well done. You got through it. Fair play, Louise Byrne from the Irish Mirror. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Do let us know. Do
She's
you
like,
fart?
I'm a serious journalist. This is terrible. Coming up, we've got the latest in sports.
We'll be back here in a few minutes.
Now, from the latest Premier League action to Drogheda United semi-final win in the FAI Cup, it was a Sunday of football for the sports fans.
Here to tell us all about it, it's sports journalist Daniel Hussey and former Dublin footballer Paddy Andrews. Thank you both so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you. In League of Ireland, there has been a war of words on and off the pitch. Shelbourne took on Shamrock Rovers. Shamrock Rovers won, but it's actually to do with Stephen Bradley and Damien Duff, the managers. What's going on here?
They've always had a bit of a cut at each other, to be honest with you. It's a massive game for both sides. Shell's going into the game 5 points clear. You feel if they got a draw against Rovers, it would effectively put them out of the title race. What happened is Rovers went with form. They won 2-0. And despite Rovers having a terrible league, 5 in a row is still on. They're only 2 points off the top of the table. So it's all this off the pitch stuff. It's just Bradley sort of having a few digs at Duffer, saying the quality of the league hasn't been that good this year, and we've had so many injuries and stuff. Now all of a sudden they're thrust right into it, where they're almost, I would say, nearly favourites to win it, despite the fact that it was a 2-horse race for ages between Derry and Shells.
One-horse race.
Yeah, one-horse race for Shells.
We're running away with it. It's great TV, I must say. Damien Duff, Shelbourne manager, obviously an Irish legend. He's brilliant value. He is box office off the pitch, and it looked like he was leading Shelbourne to an incredible title out of nowhere. And over the last 2 or 3 months, they have just imploded. 1 win in 11, and they brought everyone back into the title race. Derry looked like they were going to do it. Derry can't win a match. It's brilliant because it's so tight, but the 2 top teams can't win any games.
It's unbelievable. So
quality is low, but it's exciting.
Is that what it is?
7 points between the top 6 times. It's been described as one of the best seasons ever, or one of the worst.
Nobody wants to win it.
Shelbourne are top of the table, and they've won 1 in 11.
2 wins since June. When June was a long time ago. So.
And they're still top, even after yesterday.
But even on the points total, so Shells are still 4 points off Bowes total last season, and Bowes ended up 6th. 14 points off Shamrock Rovers. So that just shows you the levels and points. I'd urge anyone just to check last year's table versus this year.
Does Stephen Bradley have a point then in him saying, listen, the quality's awful?
Definitely this year there's been a drop, which is why that Shells team wouldn't be ordinarily good enough to win in this year, particularly having lost their best player to Hull during the summer. But it's very exciting.
Adds
for
the
neutral.
drama, and that's what you want.
And the FAI should really be pushing this and promoting this. They've had bad run of PR last few months to really promote the title race.
There's big interest in it. You've seen the crowds. Even last night was there was massive TV audience for that game, which normally there wouldn't be. Rovers, who'd been kind of terrible for most of the season, have found a bit of form over the last 4 or 5 weeks. They're going for 5 in a row. They could potentially come out of nowhere and win the title. I think Stephen Bradley's probably... It doesn't take much to wind Damien Duff up. And I think there was a little bit of needle there. But it's great we're talking about it. And for so many years we hadn't been. So
it's fantastic.
See who finally gets over the line.
Yeah, exactly. A couple of games still to go, but as you say, it's really tight at the top, which keeps everybody involved as well. And Drogheda did, of course, beat Wexford in the FAI Cup as well. We'll move to the Premier League. So Man United like, we do have to talk about Man United again.
His eyebrows finally went, yay!
The resident.
Brighton beat Tottenham, Chelsea drew with Forest, but Man United, so their draw extends the winless run to 5 games. It is their worst ever start to a Premier League season.
Yeah, and it was
Yeah.
We spoke last week about it. It kind of keeps Ten Hag. It wasn't a disastrous result. You know, United have been absolutely awful, but at least they've been kind of entertaining to watch in the evening. But it was a 0-0 draw. Not a bad result for Man United. A couple of injuries, but
On the bench, mostly because he chose not to play them. So if that just says that you're not like sure, yeah.
Exactly. one week's wages. There was talk of Ruud van Nistelrooy. That's the kind of the rumours that Van Nistelrooy, a bit of a United legend, is assistant coach at the minute. That if Ten Hag was to be pushed aside, Van Nistelrooy, who would be a bit of a fan favourite, but is he at the level? Like, is that another Solskjaer signing?
It reminds me of Solskjaer, but I do think the United fans are sort of crying out for that. I did see like a clip of him and Ten Hag disagreeing a little bit on the sideline. I think a lot was made of it in terms of because of the context of it. But I think Ruud, like a lot of the new ideas, apparently have been true Ruud van Nistelrooy, because he only joined this summer, Ten Hag's coaching staff. So it's like almost bringing your potential successor into the role. Like.
It was not a point because he was actually a manager himself.
Yeah.
Van Nistelrooy went straight in as a first-team manager when he retired from playing, won the Eredivisie over in Holland. So he seemed like the main man. So it was odd that he come in as number 2.
As assistant.
If I was Ten Hag looking around going, okay, I can see what's happening here. There's a bit of that going on, but
who
probably
knows?
Won't be a change for another couple of weeks.
We'll wait for the international break.
Okay.
We'll move on to rugby. Emerging Ireland, who's this underage rugby team, 2 wins from 2 over in South Africa. Good for them. But the women's team, after the highlight and the excitement of beating the Black Ferns and New Zealand women's team, they lost, unfortunately, to Canada. Now, Canada, to be fair,
are good.
Are top
Should be said that.
But to build on that, the excitement of beating the Black Ferns, it was disappointing.
It was always going to be tough, and you know this yourself, Tommy, from like getting those massive wins, particularly unexpected, the highs of that and bringing it back. But seeing how far that women's rugby team has gone, and obviously there has been the right amount of investment in IRFU from the last couple of months, but you didn't expect to see the results of that for a few years. It's going to take time, so it's almost like, I would say, nearly 2-3 years ahead of schedule to be beating the likes of New Zealand, and who are probably the second best team in the world outside England at the moment. So fantastic for them, a lot to build on. But yeah, obviously disappointing not to be able to follow it up, but I think that consistency will come in time, because you can't underestimate how big a surprise that New Zealand win was. It was unbelievable.
It's really unfortunate, but there's a rugby match on next weekend.
There is a big match.
It's going to be pretty in your part of town.
To Croker.
Paddy.
On the north side.
Munster versus Leinster in Croke Park. Are you going?
You'll be there, will you?
Yeah.
Did you ever want to play in the Aviva or Lansdowne Road? Was it ever something for the game?
He's like, I've got Croke Park. No.
It would have been nice. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Well, because for a lot of these Munster players...
But if Eddie O'Sullivan had decided to pick you in
maybe.
But for the Munster players, getting the chance to play in an 82,000 stadium in Croke Park would be massive. And I think there's over 70,000 tickets, so it looks like it's going to be a sellout. It's going to be a massive game, Leinster against Munster.
The fact it's a massive derby anyways, so those games are going to be so competitive. The Leinster guys obviously got to experience it last year in the Heineken Cup semi-final against Northampton, so a lot of those guys will have played there. But it's an iconic place to play, and I think Saturday night will be, that's the reason it's nearly going to sell out. A brilliant occasion. But for those players, it's a bit of a treat. Yeah, and if they can get one over on Leinster in Croke Park as well, it'd be one for the ages.
Stop.
Massive.
That's fairy tale stuff. That's all. That's all really
it's Ireland
versus the Black Ferns. Is that what it is? Isn't it?
Yeah, Black Ferns.
It could happen.
They've done a great job promoting it, and ticket prices to be able to, like, obviously people think it's a slam dunk, but to ticket price, and I thought when I saw it was just about right in terms of giving, €20 for people who want to watch on the hill.
Yeah.
And then right up to staggered pricing, which the GA don't do. So it's kind of funny seeing Croke Park, what sections the rugby decided that was the best parts in Croke Park.
Look forward to
a great occasion.
Are you going to go watch it? Have you got tickets bought? Munster against Leinster, or the other way around? Croke Park, 0896 111 111. Paddy Andrews, Croke Park. She's been there, done it there many a time. And Daniel Hussey, sports journalist. Great to have you both with us last
No, you didn't do it in Croke Park. Clearly. Sorry about that.
No, I've been to Croke Park.
Coming up, we're going to be learning about food allergies.
Yes, you're back here very shortly. You're very welcome back. Now, last week, you might have seen it online or on the show, we discussed a news story that Domino's pizza chain had withdrawn its garlic and herb and honey mustard dips over potential allergy concerns. We were surprised at the time that the items had remained on the market, and we had a bit of a giggle about it, while possibly containing peanut traces in the ingredient.
Now, some people have been in touch highlighting how allergies can become a severe health issue, so we thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss it. And if we'd offended anyone, we are incredibly sorry. It was not our intention at all. We're joined now by Dr. Isel Sheehan, who's Clinical Director with Allergy Ireland. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Now, food allergies. What causes them, and is it something you're born with, or is it something that can develop?
Yeah, so, I mean, technically, no, it's not something you're born with, but your genetics can make you a bit more vulnerable to having some sort of allergic disease. So if you have one parent, for example, who has maybe asthma, eczema, food allergy, then your child is twice as likely to develop a food allergy, or sorry, twice as likely to develop an allergy.
Oh, okay.
And if both parents have some sort of allergic disease, then you're 4 times as likely to develop an allergic disease, but not necessarily a food allergy. So food allergies don't necessarily run through families per se.
Just because one person is allergic to a peanut doesn't mean the sister or brother is going to be allergic to a peanut. Gotcha,
yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
It does seem to be something we're hearing more and more about. How many people approximately would you say would have allergies in Ireland?
Yeah, so if you look at allergies overall, you're looking at about a quarter of the population have an allergy, but that would include the inhalant allergies as well, like hay fever and dust mite and that sort of thing.
Okay.
If you're thinking about food allergies, we don't have exact figures in Ireland, but we're basing them sort of on the UK's figures somewhat. Around 5 to 6% of children in Ireland have a food allergy, and about 2% of teenagers and adults have food allergy.
And a food allergy, like what differentiates kind of a food allergy and a serious concern? The likes of a peanut allergy where people could go into like an anaphylactic shock and things.
So if you are diagnosed with a food allergy, like an immediate food allergy, where after eating you develop a reaction, on one day your reaction could be mild, like it could be a bit of swelling and hives around the face. On another day, it could be a severe reaction and it could be anaphylaxis. And the problem is you don't know, and you don't know when that you don't know when that will happen. So you just need to be prepared, really.
A thing about a food allergy and then intolerance. You know, there'd be an awful lot of people who are intolerant to certain foods, you know, with IBS, and they get bloating and all this kind of stuff. There is a big difference.
Yeah, so, I mean, there is the biggest difference is that one is life-threatening and one isn't. They're both debilitating in their own ways, absolutely. But, you know, I suppose when you're thinking about an intolerance, the symptoms people generally tend to get are more like gut symptoms, you know, bloating, things like that. And yes, they avoid the food, but if they're exposed to it, they're not going to have or potentially have a severe reaction, like if you had a peanut allergy, for example.
Sometimes when you're on a plane, you might hear an announcement saying that somebody has a peanut allergy.
Yeah.
Would that be airborne? Are there allergies that even if you're not sitting beside or you touch it or eat it, you can still get a reaction?
Yeah, so usually it's on ingestion. So, like, generally, if someone's eating, for example, a peanut in the room and you're allergic to peanut, you should be okay. I suppose there's always that fear that, you know, if someone opened a bag of nuts and there was a big spray of dust into the air, that, yes, maybe you could inhale it and you might get a reaction. Depends how allergic someone is as well. I suppose the reason you don't want to take any chances when you're on a plane is you're up in the air. I mean, like, the healthcare is limited. They do have drugs with them, and you'll always carry your own adrenaline pens and all of that. But you don't want to have an allergic reaction on a plane where possible, you know.
So what are the different symptoms? Say you're at home and, you know, you've got a child. You don't realise, because obviously it's something that develops and that you're kind of sitting there and they're not going to have it from birth because they're not having these foods.
Yeah.
So what are those sort of symptoms that people should be looking out for?
Yeah, so usually you're talking about children who are weaning onto foods, so sort of from 6 months of age.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it can go hand in hand with children who have eczema, so you'd be a little bit more on high alert with the children who have eczema when they're weaning onto foods. But say, for example, they're taking scrambled eggs or something like that for the first time, what might happen is they'll develop a bit of redness maybe around the mouth, some hives, so like a nettle sting sort of looking rash, and they might get swelling of the lips or swelling around the eyes. I suppose if it's a severe reaction, they'll also develop respiratory symptoms, which might present as a cough, like they're just coughing, or their voice sounds quite hoarse, or if their blood pressure were to drop, they can become sort of pale, they might become quite lethargic or tired. If they were old enough to tell you, they'd be feeling a little bit dizzy or a bit woozy.
Right. Okay.
I suppose if you thought that your child had developed a reaction, you want to get to a healthcare facility quickly or call an ambulance if it was a more severe reaction. But really, the main thing is to avoid the food altogether until you see your GP, and then they can refer you to an allergy clinic to get tested.
All kids' foods now have stated on it may contain nuts, whatever else, and kind of told not to take any of those products. And like as a parent, it becomes very important for your kids and their lunch boxes and everything else.
Yeah.
Is it something that everybody should be more cognizant about, that this is becoming more and more prevalent and we have to be really careful about what we eat and depending where we're eating it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at this stage, you probably have, at least one child in every classroom in Ireland who has a food allergy.
Why is it? Is it becoming more prevalent?
Yeah, it is definitely on the rise. Like, I think since around 2000, we've seen nearly a trebling of numbers. So definitely allergies overall are on the rise, and that would include food allergies as well, and nut allergies.
Do we know what the reason
there's
is?
There's no specific answer.
Being exposed to different things, genetically. Some people are, coriander or whatever. Like, could that be an issue? Like around increasing food from all over the world.
Yeah, we're definitely getting different exposures to foods. I suppose we used to think that it was this idea of living in a more sort of sterile environment, like the hygiene hypothesis.
Yeah.
Not so much anymore. There's a lot more sort of talk and research into the microbiome and sort of all the healthy bugs that live inside us and on our skin. And that if that's maybe altered, that might be predisposing us a little bit more. So like overuse of antibiotics and vitamin D deficiency, things like that might play into it as well.
Is there anything that potentially, if you don't have allergies, you could try to do to warn them off, keep them away?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely there's a lot of research into that. So I suppose, again, mainly looking at the younger children, and especially the younger children with eczema, that you want to introduce the allergenic foods as early as you can. So even as early from sort of 4, 5, 6 months, you want to introduce like a little bit of peanut butter, you want to introduce egg, milk, wheat, soy, and so on. So you want to introduce those foods as early as possible. So you definitely don't want to delay.
Okay, build up. That's interesting to build up the immunity. How do you treat allergies? Various.
So I suppose if you're diagnosed with an allergy, you'll be given an emergency plan or an action plan, so you know what to do. So if you have mild symptoms, which would include like hives, that nettle sting rash, or swelling, or maybe like tummy pain or a little bit of vomiting, you'll usually take an antihistamine, then that's enough. But you then, I suppose, if you have more severe reactions, you're going to need to carry adrenaline pens.
Okay, that's very interesting. Dr. Isabel Sheehan from Allergy Ireland, thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for coming.
Very, very interesting.
You can find out more online with Allergy Ireland, or if you have an issue, please do contact your GP. Still to come this morning, we're going to be hearing about an amazing humanitarian effort to get portable hospitals to areas of conflict.
Yeah, we'll see you back here in a couple of minutes.
It's time now to take a look at this morning's papers. We're starting with the Daily Mail. The headline there, failed asylum seekers being tipped off on Garda raids to deport them. It goes on to say that the tips are coming from officials in the International Protection Accommodation Service.
The Sun leads with Russian Dáil. Taoiseach Simon Harris has tried to play down revelations of a Russian agent in the Dáil or the Seanad. It's claimed the mystery politician fell for a honey trap and was tasked with acting for Vladimir Putin, but committed no crime.
The Herald's headline, it says overcrowding may have had a role in cell shiv death. Prison officers said they continually raise concerns about overcrowding in prisons before a man was stabbed to death in Cloverhill on Saturday.
The Examiner leads with protests as Israel ramps up Gaza and Beirut attacks. Pro-Palestinian protests took place in cities across the world while Israel bombarded Beirut with the heaviest offensive yet in Lebanon yesterday. As 1 year has passed since the Hamas attack sent the Middle East into a deadly spiral of violence.
The Star leads with staring down the barrel of hell. It shows a picture of an Israeli tank outside Irish troops' UN base in Lebanon and states this is the moment Irish soldiers stare down the barrel of a deadly Israeli tank.
Yeah, the mayor also goes with that, in the line of fire.
UN warns Israel over safety of Irish peacekeepers. Fears are mounting for the safety of 33 Irish troops trapped and surrounded at a UNIFIL outpost where fighting between the Israeli army and Hezbollah has intensified. That's the front page of today's Irish Independent.
And the Irish Times states, Irish peacekeepers steadfast as Israel advances into Lebanon. It goes on to say Irish soldiers in Lebanon remain steadfast in their determination and resilience to fulfil the mission, the Defence Forces said yesterday. Very best of luck to them.
Now, our thoughts are with them.
Lots of messages coming in this morning about a number of topics that we covered throughout the morning. And one was that Dublin Bus are introducing security guards on the buses. And they're going to do this to sort of try and stop antisocial behaviour. And Jen was in touch with us. And she said, I'm a commuter and I travel from Meath into Dublin. Buses need security so badly. I've seen it all, from attacks on passengers, attacks on bus drivers. I find getting a bus home late at night is dangerous, so I rarely stay out late. But bus drivers have no support on the buses when things go wrong. It's badly needed outside of Dublin too, and that's what we were asking you. Do you think it should only be in Dublin? Do you think it's needed outside of Dublin too? And Jen thinks it is needed.
Is it on every bus or just on random buses?
I think they're targeting areas that have got the most sort of antisocial behaviour.
Yeah, I'm a bus driver, and it's about time they've got transport police for the safety of the public and for drivers on transport. So the calls have been there for so long, but this is not transport police. They are security guards, so there is a difference. They're not going to be actually guarding.
There you have it. Now, Alan, how long are you and Carl married?
Well, married, we're together 31 years.
31 years.
Last week, yeah.
So would you say, well, let's talk, this study has found that farting in front of your partner can help strengthen your relationship.
How did they do this study?
How did they do it?
So is a key to a long-lasting relationship a good old toot in the morning?
Sure. I just blow away, it's grand.
Sorry, it's like farting, I mean. Anonymous. Married.
Started so you'll finish.
Married 21 years and have never farted in front of him that I know of. The same can't be said for him. Anyway. So this study says a toot, a fart in front of your partner is the key to a strong relationship.
It says that at the start of relationships, people wait between 2 and 6 months before they're comfortable with having a toot. But after that, it's well to go. And Anonymous says here today, God forgive me, but I wouldn't care if the Pope was standing there. Wherever you may be, let your wind go free.
There you go. Tommy, do you have a toot in the morning?
Do you know what? The kids just get such a kick out of farting. I swear, the pair of them, they just...
I'm doing it for the good of my children, guys.
But
I'm doing it for the good of my children.
Try not to do it in front of my wife, but the old romance doesn't last long after that. Anyway.
Well, do you toot in the morning? Do keep your messages coming in, 0896 111 111.
Yeah, we've got lots more coming up after the break.
Wait a minute.
Now, since the conflict began in Gaza and between Gaza and Israel last October, over 42,000 Palestinians have died, with more being in desperate need of medical aid.
Joining us now are two people who are aiming to help with the humanitarian effort in Gaza. Please welcome co-founder of One for Humanity, Shane Leahy, and entrepreneur Ross Kelly. Thank you both so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Now, Shane, you're known, like you played rugby, like you played for Connacht, you played for Munster, you've had this career. How did you get into humanitarian work?
I've always had an interest in it and would have been involved in various different initiatives over the years, but I guess at the outset of the Ukrainian war, I felt like so many Irish that I needed to get involved and do something. So I initially volunteered for Goethe and ended up on the Ukrainian side of the border with Slovakia. and I guess met quite a few people and heard their stories and got more involved. And through business and rugby connections, I got in contact with CMark, which is the biggest cement company in Ukraine. It's owned by CRH, an Irish company. And we were quickly able to establish warehouses and distribution within Ukraine using their warehouses and their truck drivers. And through that, we got a US charity called Heart to Heart, and they donated 16 hospital units and 80 million in medicines and counting. And we were able to bring that from the early stages of the war right to the front lines using the CMark drivers. So we were able to scale our humanitarian effort quite quickly.
Yeah.
That's incredible, isn't it? The determination, I suppose, coming from sport and the contacts that you make along the way help massively. But your own organisation, One for Humanity, so it's now delivering aid to Gaza. We hear all the time how difficult it is for them to get aid into Gaza. What sort of form is this aid?
Yeah, I'm going to hand that over to Ross because he's more expert in the Gaza side of things.
So what we're doing is we're providing a surgical unit, a mobile surgical unit, which is basically a 20-foot shipping container with 2 adjoining tents, which have 2 recovery beds and a scrub room, and it contains everything you need to perform an operation. And
so we're seeing, is this it here?
Yeah, that's it. That's from my visit to Holland 2 weeks ago. So it's fully kitted out. It has everything you need to perform. You can do 10 surgeries a day with it. The field hospital we're working with the International Medical Corps in Gaza can currently do 40 operations a day. The provision of this unit will increase that by 10 surgeries a day, so an extra 3,000 surgeries a year, effectively.
How did you get involved in this, Ross?
Well, I'm involved in the Entrepreneur of the Year network with Shane, and Shane launched the Gaza response last November. I donated to it, and he rang me about 6 weeks later saying, I'm not sure this is going to work. It's very hard to get stuff in. I might give you your money back. And I said, look, don't do that. Let me help out. So I took over the whole kind of problem-solving aspect of it. I started talking to lots of hospitals in Gaza, all the institutions like World Health Organization, very, very difficult. Finally came across International Medical Corps, who are an American-backed charity, and they built an American-backed field hospital, which that field hospital alone has treated 200,000 people since January.
What?
So it's effectively the fourth leg, or it's the main referral hospital in Gaza. And the great thing about it is because these field hospitals can be packed up and moved in 12 hours. And you see the evacuation orders that happen all the time.
Yeah.
So, and they also work very closely with the Israeli authorities, which is one of the key things to getting stuff in. Okay. We have to work with all sides here if we actually want to provide humanitarian assistance. So these guys have a proven track record of getting things in. The unit, we raised the money in August. We shipped it a couple of weeks ago. It's currently sitting in Egypt on the border. There is onerous approval processes that have to be gone through. But we're nearly there, and we're very confident it's going to get in.
What sort of cost would something like this? Because the level that this can do, and even what is it's called a hospitainer, like what?
Yeah. So the unit is about 225,000. So for a fully functional operating theatre, I think it's pretty good value for money.
Wow.
The interesting thing is that you can actually buy a fully functioning field hospital, 50-bed field hospital for €2 million, which is, when you think about it, is incredibly cheap in the grand scheme of things.
It's unbelievable, like what you're able to do and how many people have been treated in these field hospitals. But obviously, there was an issue. You were able to scale very quickly in Ukraine, but there's been an issue with Gaza.
Well, it's exactly what we're trying to do in Gaza as well. So we've got our first unit, which is on the border with Gaza, but we've already agreed our second unit.
Okay.
So that is all, and thank you for the institutions for support. We're speaking to a number of universities and government with Ireland, and 2 incredible individuals, Professor Chris Fitzpatrick and Professor Jerry Burry, both of UCD, have been absolutely phenomenal. Okay. 2 of the most inspiring people I've ever met. And they've been giving us, I've worked with them in Ukraine. They're doing trauma training in Ukraine in Kyiv on an ongoing basis, but they've assisted us in Gaza. And we hope to scale it so that we get 10 units in, so that we effectively have an Irish hospital operating in Gaza, being operated by the International Medical Corps. So
what's the support like here in Ireland?
It's incredible, in fairness. It's an open door in terms of talking to the institutions, to government. Everybody wants to help. It's a horrible situation of what's happening in Gaza and a terrible plight in the people. So everybody wants to help. And it's very difficult to get that help in place. and it has taken us literally 9 months to be able to get to the position that we are, and through a huge amount of work from Ross and multiple different areas. But we are making progress, and we're getting incredible support all around.
I suppose one thing when wars like this drag on, you become desensitised to what's happening. Although we're waking up in the morning and we're seeing Beirut on fire today, a year on for the conflict. And Shane, you've been on the front line, you've been there seeing what's happening. And we're seeing these pictures. You have to prepare yourself for this, like the human cost to what's happening.
Yeah, it is. You do have to prepare yourself. You have to prepare yourself mentally, because not just because of what you see, but what you feel and seeing the people. And it's different things that will affect you in different ways. But it is a difficult and obviously incredibly stressful.
You have kids yourself.
Yep.
You've been on the front line in Ukraine, I believe, a number of times.
Yeah.
What's it like?
Surreal. Literally, I was in Odessa recently, and it's an absolutely beautiful city with a buzzing nightlife and bars and restaurants and people milling about and getting on with everyday life. And then just up the road, you've got the front line. And literally, I went from Odessa, went up to Kherson, was shelled in Kherson, unfortunately, but was back in Odessa having dinner and a glass of wine that night. So it's a surreal situation.
Isn't that crazy?
And it is just absolutely crazy, because you're then looking at people walking around Kherson who are just literally in a trance. Yeah. They're in post-traumatic stress.
Really?
So it's just an
and
incredible
drones,
situation.
I believe, though, are the big difference that you've noticed over the time that you're there.
Yeah, I guess the first time I was in Kherson, the shelling was bad enough, but the most recent time, it has become a drone war, which is absolutely incredibly scary, because you're just constantly looking to the sky and constantly keeping a watch out, and it's just surreal again, because you're just constantly on edge with it.
I think for all of this, Ross, obviously you're looking at a situation where you're talking about 200,000 people treated in one field hospital, but as we've seen, there's over 40,000 people who have died. We don't know how many people are under rubble, and there are constant attacks. And it's unfortunate that you're sitting there going, we have to get more of these units in. And the personnel to then staff them, they're there and ready to go?
Yeah, this field hospital employs 1,000 Palestinian medical staff already, and another 1,000 volunteers. A lot of those people have lost their jobs, and there's a lot of very highly trained Palestinian medical staff. So as well as saving lives, it's also giving people work to do. And we've been told that the Palestinian medics are the best because they know how to handle this kind of situation. A lot of foreign people coming in maybe wouldn't be able to cope. I think with regard to the situation and how long it's going to go on, like, what else can we do besides try and help keep people alive? There's not much else that we can do as humanitarians.
Is that what it felt like for you? It just felt like there was a call that you had the means and you have to do something.
There's 1 million children in Gaza.
Yeah.
There's 1 million, half the population of children. So from my perspective, just think that's absolutely heartbreaking, and not taking any sides. We just want to help in that regard.
Just want to help.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. When the unit's delivered over to Gaza, you're going to go over there. You're going to be over there as well. Yeah. Are you prepared for it? How do you prepare?
I don't think you can prepare for something like that. You got to get ready yourself, I guess, is the best way in relation to it, and just sort of switch your mental attitude towards that. Stay alert and just get on with it. Get in and get out as quickly as you can. Although in Gaza, that's very, very difficult.
Yeah, and you are hopeful that, I know it's on the border with Egypt, and as you said, Ross, you have to continue to talk to everyone. This is what it is when you're doing humanitarian aid. You're trying to talk to everybody. So hopeful, and we know that with Egypt, they are trying all the time to get as much aid in as possible, and it has been quite difficult. But once you've started this supply route, that you've got all your vendors and suppliers, you think it'll be able to be ramped up?
Well, so the IMC have already built a significant field hospital. They started in January, and they've got a lot of stuff in, and they know how to do it. It's very challenging. They've built a system. They've got, as I said, they've got a great relationship with the Israeli authorities. So they really are, in my mind, we were lucky to come across them, because I'm not sure if we were not working with them, would we be able to get anything in. So it is a bit of a Gordian knot. Hopefully we've solved it.
They do have regular supplies going in on a regular basis. Obviously not as often as they want, but on a weekly basis they have supplies going in.
The organisation is One for Humanity. If people are watching now and they want to help out, how can they do it?
At the moment, we've actually closed for funding. We're volunteers ourselves. We pay all of our own expenses. We've purchased the first hospital unit, and now we're in discussions with institutions about providing institutions and government about providing additional units. So I guess it's to publicise it at the moment and what we're trying to do to be able to scale it. And that's our aim now, is to scale it.
You can, of course, find out more online to see what is happening. And it's phenomenal, the ingenuity that can happen out of these horrendous circumstances. It is amazing. Shane Leahy and also Ross Kelly, it is One for Humanity is where it is. Thank you both so much for coming in.
Thank you very
Fair
much
play.
for
Please stay safe.
All the
Mind
very
yourselves.
best. Yeah.
Thanks a million.
Amazing.
Thanks for staying with us. Now we're getting a little taste of North India in the kitchen today.
Oh, it smells delicious. Mindy Keane is here making a palak paneer puff pastry. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Chef.
What does that mean?
Palak is spinach.
Yeah.
And paneer is Indian cheese. Basically, it's like, what's that cheese? Halloumi.
Oh, right.
But without the saltiness.
And will people be able to get that here?
You
then?
can get that, yeah. You can get it in Tesco's and Dunnes.
Oh, okay.
So
Can
Asian
I
shop.
put halloumi in if I like
You
the
can,
saltiness?
but then...
Yeah, it's not the same.
Yeah,
Okay,
like,
right.
we're
okay.
going to go Asian,
Yeah,
all
we
Asian.
are, of course. Let's
Asian
do it.
fusion.
Okay,
So,
how do we start?
A bit of oil. A little bit of olive oil goes in, and then I'm going to put some cumin seeds in, OK?
Right.
So I don't know whether you've ever tasted cumin seeds, but there's quite a nutty flavour to these. So they're going to go in the hot oil.
Can I just use normal ground cumin, or the seeds?
No, go with
better
the
off?
seeds, because you get a bit of crunch and it gives you that nuttiness. And then
Okay.
into that, we're going to add in the onions, finely chopped, because you don't want big chunks. Obviously, they're going into a pastry, so you want it to be quite fine, OK? So I'm going to turn that right up. So once you get that caramelised, it won't take long. The beauty of onions is there's a little trick. If you put a bit of salt on, it sweats them and they cook quicker, OK?
Oh, really?
So it sweats the water out of them, so it does cook quicker. So a little bit of salt.
If we weren't on telly, you wouldn't do that, though, would you? Because you want the juice in it, no?
Well, I probably would, because I've already then put the salt in. I'm going to add salt in later, so I've already done it now.
Oh,
so you
okay.
don't, so you're
Don't
not
have to do it
backtracking.
later.
Yes.
Have to do it later, OK.
So
fair
into
enough.
that then, I have a tablespoon of ginger, garlic and chillies, OK?
Ooh, right.
Bit of spice.
Lovely.
So you need
You've
the
gone
spice.
Green chilies.
Going for green. You can go for red, you can go for whatever you
Doesn't
want.
make any difference.
No. And if obviously, if it's for the children, delete them, OK? Just don't put them in. If you... But these
When do you
chilies...
start to get used to the heat? You know,
When?
do kids just kind of develop
Well,
it?
just a lot of people say that. I mean, like, obviously Asians are brought up. I mean, I was brought up and we weren't given Farley's rust. We were given, there's a chapati, there's curry, eat it. Growing up. So, you know...
And hot curry.
Well, no, it wouldn't be hot, but it'd be basic.
bit.
Yeah. I mean, you sort of, you just... What you don't know, you don't...
Well, exactly.
Do you know
Like
what I
if
mean?
you start your children on prawns or different things like that, they start growing up liking
That's it.
Yeah.
Like that lady said earlier on, you get them trying stuff while they're young.
Yeah, exactly. It's important. Yeah, it's great.
Okay, so you get all that goodness has gone in there. Okay, so into that then we're going to put in the spices. So again, a little bit of chili. I'm only going to put a bit in, okay? A little bit of chili, it's a quarter of a teaspoon of chili.
Okay.
Garam masala, which is the 16
yes,
spices.
need
That
that.
goes in there, half a teaspoon. This is coriander powder, half a teaspoon. And a bit of turmeric, okay, to add a little bit of colour. And also turmeric is so good for you. Okay.
I love your little spice rack there.
Yeah, it's lovely,
Do
isn't
you
it?
encourage people just to go out and buy literally one day, go and get them all and put them in, have them in your kitchen?
Well, I sell them anyway, so yeah, they can
Yeah,
come
you
and buy
sell-
them.
Do you sell them like that?
I do. They come with all the spices. This is all you need to make a curry. Any curry. There's 6 spices there. Okay?
So how can they find you online if they want to buy it?
mamanaggies.ie.
What is it?
Mamanaggies.
Mama Nagy's. There we go.
That's
Perfect.
named after my mother, yeah.
Oh, lovely.
So that's gone in.
Look at the colour and the turmeric on
Yeah,
that.
and you can smell it. And then the cheese is going in, okay?
Well, that's a right lump of that. So
yeah,
does
well,
that
that's
come
just
grated?
No,
or-
no, it comes in a solid pack. And
Okay.
I've just grated it just because of time. We just don't
Yeah.
have it here. So that's going to go in.
Wow, the smell.
And then, I mean, paneer is used quite a lot in Asian cooking because majority of Asian cooking, northern cooking, would be vegetarian.
I thought that would like melt straight away.
No, it doesn't melt.
It doesn't melt.
No, like halloumi wouldn't melt either. No, that's why it's called cooking cheese. You can cook with it. So if you've ever been to an Asian restaurant and you've got paneer and saag. Saag paneer would be one. Saag is just spinach.
Yeah.
Another word for spinach.
Is
And
that the spinach you put in there?
yeah, that's spinach. So that's gone in there. And then you're just going to basically let that sort of cook through, okay?
Yeah. So how do we make the parcels then?
Right, now we're going to that bit. So that doesn't need cooking much because it's all vegetarian, it's all cooked. So I'm just going to turn that right down. And I've just got a tray here, okay? So just a baking tray. You can get smaller ones if you want. There's puff pastry there.
Yeah.
Okay, you can use any pastry. You can use...
And you're not making your own, you just buy shop bought.
Shop bought.
Oh, God.
Yeah. Oh, God, yeah, couldn't be doing that in too much trouble.
I mean, like, why would you when you can get it?
Yeah.
So you've doubled up there, is that?
Yeah, I'm basically trying to create layers. You know, so just to sort of build it up.
Oh,
and then I've got a cooled version that I made earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to add a little bit of that in the middle of there.
Yeah.
Okay. And then a bit of, you can add some pine nuts if you want, okay? Add a bit of crunch to it.
Definitely,
a bit of pine nut. Again, obviously make sure there's nobody allergic to nuts and all that.
Of course, yeah.
And then what we're going to do here is, and I'm just going to add a little bit of egg and milk. And then I'm just going to fold it over. Actually, fold it over like that. And you can layer it up a little bit more.
Oh, so you don't put one on top? You're kind of folding
you're
it over.
just
That's why
folding
you
it.
had a couple of them.
Yeah, so you're just basically folding it over.
And I thought with phyllo pastry you can kind of put water on it. No, it's better to have eggs.
Well,
isn't
it was just to brown it as well a
Yeah.
little bit, you know. So again, you're just basically creating that. And that'll help it stick as well.
Yeah.
And then you can add a few of the sesame seeds on top.
And how long does that go into the oven for?
So 180 for 15 to 20 minutes.
And here they are here.
That's
So
them
it comes
there,
out like that.
Yeah.
And they're absolutely gorgeous.
And they're healthy as well.
Vegetarian dish, dead easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah. I mean, you can use any pastry, like I say, phyllo, puff pastry.
Oh no, the phyllo pastry
The
just
phyllo
adds that
pastry is lovely.
crunch. I'd say
And
the
look at them,
kids would
they're a
love
lovely
it.
lunch dish or something like that. aren't
Exactly,
they?
with a salad or just on
Yeah.
their own. Happy out there. Yeah.
It is delicious.
Okay.
It's a little bit
Mindy,
dry.
thank you so much for
very
that.
welcome.
Absolutely beautiful. Thank
Mam
you
and
so
Aggies.
much. Mam and Aggies.
There you go.
Aggies.ie, yeah.
Coming up, we are going to learn about Alan's past lives from a psychic medium.
Should be interesting. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back. Now, our next guest is a full-time medium, having spoken to spirits since the age of 4.
Yes, Natasha Bracken features on the new season of Real Life with Lucy. But before we chat all things psychic, let's take a look at her episode tonight with Lucy Kennedy.
So I want you to take a deep breath up for me. I want you to breathe from the right side of your leg up. Out through the mouth. What are you doing? This energy no longer serves you, Lucy, so take a deep breath.
Rarely lost for words, currently am. That was unbelievable. Like, genuinely, for all you cynics out there, I felt everything she said.
Good morning,
Good
Natasha
morning.
Bracken. It's lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Good.
Sorry now, what was going on there? What were you doing?
So basically, we were after doing past life with her, and on the bed we were bringing out any negativity that was in her body, and just there was a lot going on around the stomach area. So we were just removing it from her energy. So by me breathing into her stomach, she could actually feel it going down into her toes, down into her full body. So it goes into different dementias. So sometimes a doctor might not see what's on in the physical body, but that's where we work on the outer body. So like the likes of fibromyalgia, pain, any negativity. There might be tears in the aura fields. There might be different directions that needs a lot of healing. So when I was breathing into her stomach, it was going through her body and also through her joints.
Wow. And we mentioned in the intro there that you started feeling that you had or you could see spirits or feel spirits at the age of 4.
Since I was 4, I could see spirit, and probably younger.
In what way, can I ask you?
I would see different figures beside me. I would see spirit as if you were seeing a person. I wouldn't have known it was any different Dan will say what your eyes may see. I don't know what your eyes may see, but it's completely different. And not everyone will believe that emotionally. And as growing up, I would have always tried to, as I got to know it a little bit more, I definitely didn't want it. So it's not something that I wanted to be different.
Yeah. You always hear that about an awful lot of mediums because it can be very distracting. But is there, like, do you talk to dead people? Do you talk to the spirit world? Is that what it is?
Yes, I do shows all over Ireland, and I do shows, and I speak to the spirit world a lot for people as well. People that would have lost and grieved, and it brings great comfort. And yet, look, everybody to their own. Some people don't believe, some people do, some people believe in God, some people believe, you know,
exactly.
There's just everyone. But I can only tell you what I see, and I believe in what I see. Do you know?
Yeah.
I just speak to my own kids can do it as well. So it's running through my generation. My father has a healing clinic as well in Ballinasloe, where they have salt rooms, and I have my other sister. She's a psychic medium as well. So it's gone through generations of us on my mother's side and my father's side.
Oh, so it's all like the whole family are very...
There's it's gone into a G, into a V, into myself and my sister. We're two psychic medium sisters. We can only find it's like bloodline that can actually used to do the shows together at some stage as well.
And you say you're 50% spirit, 50% human in one of the episodes when you're talking to Lucy.
Yes, so when I was in school, I couldn't, got it very hard to read, write, couldn't understand why my mind wasn't actually working the way another child was. So that leaves me, as I grew up, I discovered that I was more 50% human and 50% spirit. So on my higher level, you'd go up higher in the vibration, and that's where you study. So if I was studying, if I had a child that's dyslexia or gets it hard in school, I would teach them through music. It's easier for the child to learn. Because it's on a higher level.
Right.
You know.
Now, you said that you've had many past lives.
Yes.
And a little while ago, you did a reading on me. Can you actually tell everybody what you saw with me?
So basically, with Alan, you had 3 past lives previous. So this is your 4th past life.
Okay.
And in your 3rd past life, you drowned at a very young age in water.
So I died of drowning.
Yeah, there was a lot of water in his lungs from the past energy. So there was a lot of different vibrations that was leading to his shoulder. So he's actually having pains in his shoulder today.
Yeah, remember the pain?
Yeah,
like
I
my
know.
shoulder pains,
You've got very bad pain in your shoulder.
And very interesting, in my first life.
In his first life, there was a real old soul. So that was there was a very deep soul, actually. There's a lot of trauma to that soul. So that's something that I would recommend that you would get healing from, because in Alan's first life, he actually was in the army and would have lost his right leg.
You were in the army.
I lost my right leg, but also I had a daughter, or my first life I had a daughter.
in it was, so it kept bringing me back to a younger version of Alan when he was younger, and he would have lost a daughter, and he was traumatised with that as well. So I kept seeing an old couch. So sometimes with past lives, you can hear the clipping of horse shoes. You can see the different vibrations. You can get the different senses. And in his second one, there was actually a very female presence, where you were a female in that past life, but died as an older woman. Do you know? So it's when you...
But like when she said, you drowned very young in life in my 3rd life, I said, OK.
So hold on now. So he's been around. So
this is my 4th life.
So has he always been in and around art? So he's even older than we think he is.
Well, you see, he's more mature. More mature, Alan.
More mature. OK, I actually think I felt very calm and very sort of at peace when you were doing it. We're going to do one on mirror now. You're going to do an aura reading.
We see these for water divining, is it?
Yeah.
So you're going to do an aura reading.
So I'm going to do yours. So I use these for... so if I was to go like this and I was to show me where Alan is in the room.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, my gosh. So mad.
Show me where I am. Spin 3 times and stop at Alan.
OK, let's do...
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, let's do your aura reading.
Amazing. So how do you do an aura? What do we need to do?
So if we stand up...
OK, Natasha,
so
what do we do?
You can turn your back to me, if that's OK.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to move you up just a slight bit. OK.
So left.
Yeah. So just hands down on your side for me.
I'm worried about this now.
No, no talking.
Are you getting anything, Natasha, there now?
So you've got a lot of pink coming up through your spinal cords there. And what it's showing you there is that the compassion that you have, there's a lot going on around the heart, emotions. And it's also got to do with changes that's coming into your life. You've got a little bit of blue just sitting into the bottom of your feet, which is a beautiful energy, but it's also got to do with a lot of old stuff leaving your life. So new beginnings are going to come into your vibration, a new opportunity will there coming in, but there'll be a lot of new decisions in the next 6 weeks.
Oh, God, that's a lot.
That's a lot.
That's amazing. So many decisions. I'm going to get that.
So, literally, episode 1 of Real Life with Lucy.
See that?
You just see that and it's going around. That's fascinating, isn't it?
So, it's episode 1, Real Life with Lucy. It's tonight at 9 o'clock on Virgin Media Play and Virgin Media 1.
Yeah, we're so excited about it.
You let someone into your life like that and you really kind of exposed yourself because this is your full-time job, this is what you do, and skeptics in the world. How was that? Was it okay?
Yeah, no, we really enjoyed it. I have been approached with people before, but I would never let them...
Lucy's the best. She's fantastic. Natasha Bracken, thank you so much. Best of luck with the episode tonight.
Thanks very much, guys.
A lot of change in 6 weeks' time. I'm counting down. We'll be back with you in a minute. 6 weeks.
Hello, you are very welcome back. Now, we were discussing a lot of things this morning, one of them being about this survey that has found that it is good to... what's wrong?
Nothing. Keep on going.
What do you do? Toot in the morning?
A toot in the morning. Or, so literally, it says that to strengthen your relationship with your partner, it's found that farting in front of them is good for...
Who did
for the relationship?
Who did this?
The survey found that most people wait a good 2 to 6 months, and like that's the worst, isn't it? You've got that period, 2 to 6
holding
months.
it in.
So a disaster.
Imagine holding it in for 6 months. That couldn't be good for your insides.
Can't be good for insides. When you're you can't go to the toilet or anything. Anyway, Jennifer has sent in a message saying, our house is like a brass band in the morning. Even when I drop the husband and son anywhere, they let rip in the car, gas me before they get out.
That's like a joke.
That's
doing
actually...
that in the car, then jump out, close the doors.
I find it fascinating I find it fascinating that men can control it in that way.
Oh, yeah,
well, holding it and
just to be like,
waiting on it.
I think that's
But
mad.
Do you know what? In front of your partner or your wife or your husband, your partner, I mean, it's something. It's
I
natural.
know, but you shouldn't be doing like if you want to try and keep any sort of spark alive. Doing that isn't good, is it?
Julie says anyone who says they've never farted in front of their partner is lying. You'd combust.
You actually would.
You have to do it.
Yeah,
it's just when.
Abby says my granddad toots morning, noon, and night.
It's it's
his favourite past.
I think we need to put the farting.
Women are like specialists at the SBDs. The silent but deadly.
Oh, silent but deadly.
That's because you're kind of proud of them, as though they're a child that has done really well in a sporting tournament.
My
you're like,
kids,
well done.
they just like anytime there's a handstand competition going on in our house, be prepared. They just love letting rip. Yeah, there you go.
Why would there be handstand competitions in your house?
Like we all doing handstands, messing around. My daughter's mad for handstands.
So you and Lucy and the kids are doing handstands?
No, well, I'd be showing them how it's actually done. But
this is like, watch Daddy now doing handstands. This is how you do it.
I love when we get a little insight.
And then you let one rip as you're doing a handstand.
No, well, I don't.
We have
the kids do.
We have to stop. We have to stop. Thank you so much for those insightful messages. Up next, we're going to hear from a writer whose latest book delves into the relationship between son and father, forgiveness, and a final pilgrimage.
Yes, we're going to be speaking to author Michael Harding in just a few minutes. We'll see you back after this short break.
Welcome back. Now, our next guest has been described as a stand-up philosopher and has been very open in writing about his health issues, changing faith and his relationship over the last 15 years.
Please welcome writer Michael Harding. Good morning to you,
Morning,
Michael.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
It's lovely to be
You're
with you.
on to talk about your new book. We might as well get straight into it. I loved him from the day he died.
Yeah.
It's a book about your father. It's 50 years since his passing, though.
Yeah.
Why has it taken so long to write this book about your father? And what's in the name of the title, I loved him from the day he died?
Well, my father was a remote person. You know, he lived in an armchair under a standard lamp, reading the newspaper. And there was no great intimacy. And he was old when he married. He was 50 when he married, or 49. So he was quite old. By the time I came to, we'll say, 10 years of age, you know, he was an old man. And in those days, in your 60s was considered very old, right? So he was kind of remote. And then he died when I was 23 or 22. And I felt that as the years went on, I was always I was admiring father figure people, right? And it probably even is what brought me into religion, the kind of being drawn to the template of the fatherhood as an idea, you know. But I felt in so many times in my life, when I was in my 20s and 30s, I missed having an adult conversation with him, right? And as I got older, I look like him. And that's really frightening when you get to that stage that your father was an old man and then somebody says to you someday, you remind me of your father. You look like him.
Yeah.
And I look in the mirror and I look like him, right? So I thought I'd love to have a last conversation with him, even though he's 50 years dead, and just kind of, you know, bid him farewell in whatever next life. You were talking earlier about, you know, previous lives.
Yeah.
But maybe in whatever next life he went on to, I'd love to wish him well, you know.
And
so I went and did the Camino.
yeah, you did this through the prism of the Camino.
Yeah.
It was you
Yeah.
and your dad, who's been dead for years, that
Yeah.
you never had a close relationship
Yeah.
with.
And
So-
it was like a love letter. You know, it was like communicating with somebody that you really hadn't had the chance to talk to, because, as I say, I was only 22 when he died.
But I think an awful lot of, you know, men your age, men of a certain age, would have had that relationship with their father, you know, where it was
remote.
where it was remote and distant.
Very remote, yeah.
Because it isn't like dads now who are so involved.
No.
And how did you get to know him? Like, you know, because your real life interactions with him wouldn't have been what we'd see today.
No. There was no relationship there except, you know, you love your parent even if there isn't intimacy. You know, you love your parent. He's your father. You know, he's shaping some part of your psyche. And for me, a big way that he shaped it was he was a writer. He wasn't a full-time writer, but he was very devoted to writing reviews of books in the Irish press. And so he supported me by giving me space to write. He didn't consider it an unusual thing when I was a teenager and I would be writing poems.
Yeah.
What would you ask him?
Do you know, when he was alive?
If you were to have one conversation.
If I was to
with
have
him.
a conversation now, my father would be like a novel that I never read. I would have 100 questions about what was it like when he was growing up, what were the hardships that he experienced, where did his people come from, how did he feel when he fell in love? Do you know what I mean? How did he feel when he had his first child? You know, because as you say, those men, maybe their lives were harder and the struggle to sort of keep out of poverty was more real. But he never really played. He didn't have the instinct to be playing games with his child or to be kicking the football with his child. And I always remember when my daughter was a baby and she was growing up and she'd want to kick the football or play games, right? I found that there was a lack in me, you know, that I hadn't learned the instinctive way to be playful because I hadn't learned it from my parent.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's so much that I would have loved to ask him, but I think one of the things that I felt about the Camino was it wasn't a question of kind of asking the questions, but there was kind of bidding him farewell, because there's also, I think you have to have closure with your parent when they pass away. And the phrase that I used for the book, I loved him from the day he died. I got it from Michael Hartnett, a great poet who had written a poem called it was for an Irish mother, and it was for his mother. But he had a beautiful line in it, which was, I loved her from the day she died. And it seemed so perfect for me when I thought about my father, that when he was there, I was young, I wasn't really conscious of having a relationship with him. But the minute, when the funeral was over, I remember when the funeral was over and I saw the coffin being closed for the last time, and I was 22 years of age, and I went back up to West Cavan where I was living, and I suddenly started to feel, who was he? Because he was big in my life, and I haven't even figured out anything really.
That sort of finality.
Yeah,
You're so young.
and I can never ask him another question.
Yeah, it's gone.
You know,
when you do this is the 8th volume in sort of your memoir sequence, which are just beautiful books, and you go really deep in these books. And oftentimes there has been, you know, you've really talked about your faith, you know, practicing for the priesthood, you've converted to Buddhism, and you're on the Camino. How was the Camino? Because it does seem like sort of a rite of passage for so many people nowadays, from whether you're young or old.
I tell you the great thing about the Camino, and I would be a real supporter. I would encourage, do the Camino, it's great fun. The great thing about it is that if you're going to do a pilgrimage, it's definitely religious, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to walk 120 or 200 kilometres to a big city of Santiago, the city of St. James, and that's really, you don't get much more Catholic Christian than that, right? But in actual fact, when you're on the road, there's nothing overtly religious about it. You don't find people gripping rosary beads and having cross faces and worrying about, you know, God and redemption. All you see are young people, old people who are just joyfully walking. So in that sense, the Camino is a real example of how culturally Christianity is reinventing itself. And we're very aware of the crumbling edifice of the Christian churches. We're very aware of that. And it's good, but it has to happen. But what we're not so aware of is where there are new shoots of life. There's new growth. There's kind of new imaginative ways, which are totally different, but still they're the same thing. Do you know that kind of way? So I found the Camino, you'd be sitting there having a coffee after maybe walking 10 miles in beautiful sunshine under beautiful trees in the north of Galicia in Spain. And you'd be stopping at a place for a little coffee and a croissant. And all around you would be people, maybe old women and men in their 80s from Dublin or Mayo who are walking the Camino, and maybe young ones from Australia, America, Dublin. And they'd be there with the shoes off and the socks off, and they'd be cutting their nails because they'd blisters or something. And it's all very raw and fun and kind of social as well, I have to say,
It's the people that you meet. I love this line that you wrote, and I don't know if this was in the book or one of your articles, or you wrote it with a lady about the young ones and said, aren't they great? They're walking towards the future they dream of, while we're walking with the dreams behind us.
Yeah, that's a bit sad to say, isn't it? About old people.
Yeah.
But there is a thing about, you know, being, I'm 71, and there is a very important thing, kind of a transition, I think, when you come to maybe 70, that you do actually savour your dreams and acknowledge that they're in the past. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not a bad thing. The past and the future, maybe, there's something eternal that's ever present.
Yeah.
You know? And so the love you remember, when I think about remembering my father, it's an act of intimacy. All remembrance is intimacy. And that's very pleasurable. In fact, Garcia Marquez, great writer, but he says we experience life more in the memory than in the experience, because you might have a car crash and, you know, maybe dinge the front of your car and you'd be really upset.
Yeah.
But 2 years later, you're sitting at the dinner table talking about it, and you're laughing at it. You're saying, do you remember the time we crashed the car?
Yeah.
So there's a strange thing that memory, there's a great joy in the space of memory. And I think it's a lovely thing that you can do when you come to 70 years of age. You can have a very rich life, nurturing the dreams and the adventures that you've had in your life, and just savour them.
It's so beautiful. Your writing is just so beautiful. I could sit here and listen to you all day. It's the 8th memoir from you in
the final episode. That's the final.
It's not the final episode.
Yeah,
no more.
No, that's the special book. That is it.
I don't know about that.
I'll write another book, but the memoir, the series of memoir, it can't. That's it.
That's it. Well, he says that it's done. I loved him from the day he died. My Father, Forgiveness, and A Final Pilgrimage by Michael Harden. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome back now. Hibernation season is here and Deric is having a little snooze. Cozying up with a few hedgehogs.
He is. We sent him to the amazing team in Kildare Wildlife Rescue this morning.
Yes, Deric, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, team. Gurmila, welcome down here to Kildare Wildlife Rescue. We're talking all things hedgehogs here this morning. One of my favourite little animals. We're joined now by Pierce Stokes and our local vet here, Fiona Grimes. Good morning to you both. Pierce, I'll kick off with you because hedgehogs, it's a busy time of year for them.
Yeah, so at this time of year with hedgehogs, they come into all kinds of trouble. Unfortunately, coming up to Halloween, there's risks there. They're being run over in the dark days, the dark mornings. They're a nocturnal animal. If you see a hedgehog out during the day, probably needs help. You need to get a video of that animal, send it to Kildare Wildlife Rescue. But they are the only animal in Ireland that hibernates, truly. They're a really, really nice animal to have in your garden. If you've got a hedgehog in your garden, you've got a healthy garden. They're insectivores. They're out there, and what we're just saying to people at this time of year is to leave the leaves. You don't need to mow the leaves, you don't need to sweep them up and put them in a bag and bring them to the dump. Leave the leaves where they are, let the insects, the larvae, let the hedgehogs live in them. They make a lovely little nest in them, and that's what we're just hoping that people will do.
Yeah, they are, of course, mammals, and they're fast little creatures as well, aren't they?
They're surprisingly fast. Again, you shouldn't really see them, so you shouldn't really know how fast they are, but they absolutely can move. So if you see one, like I said, out during the day, and if you can catch it, essentially, then there's something definitely wrong with that poor animal. And Fiona will talk to you about the kinds of things that they have to actually deal with.
Now, you were telling me this time of year, in fact, well, they're going to hibernate in December, but there's a lot of risk for them at this time of year, right?
Yeah, this is an important time of year for them because they need to get nice and heavy so that they can survive that hibernation. So they need lots of food. They're out there busily working away. But then they build their nests, and their nests just look like big piles of leaves. And what they do is they'll nest up, and they might find themselves in a nest in a bonfire. And so we're asking people, you know, if they are making a bonfire, to say just move it before you light it, because you can have hedgehogs inside. That's obviously a terrible way for a hedgehog to go. Similarly, they're dying on the road. So in the UK, in the 1950s, there was about 30 million hedgehogs. Now they've got about 500,000 hedgehogs. So we're talking about huge population decline there. And in the urban environments in the UK, the numbers are actually going up. So there's a lot of things that people can do in their own gardens and stuff to help hedgehogs.
And if people come across a hedgehog or two in their own garden, then, Pierce, what should they do?
Like all wildlife, admire it from afar. Enjoy having that beautiful piece of biodiversity in your garden. You're very lucky. But if it's out during the day, it's unwell, you definitely need to get care of that. That means get a video of it, preferably if you can, of it moving around, and send that to your local wildlife rescue or hedgehog rescue, because there's a couple of those too. Never feed them milk. They're lactose intolerant. I know everybody everybody thinks that you should be feeding them milk. No wildlife really should receive milk. So what you want is to, you know, encourage insects in your garden. Leave the slug pellets, leave the insecticides, leave all that out of your garden. And if you have a natural, healthy garden, you might end up with a hedgehog, which is lovely.
So let them do the work. All right, Fiona is our local vet from Grey Abbey. Good morning to Fiona.
Hi, Deric.
And we've got a gorgeous little hedgehog here. Tell us about him.
Yeah, so he came in as an orphan, so sometimes we find them as babies, displaced. He's been with us for a little while. We've hand-raised him here. So I'm just giving him a health check. So they need to be about 600 grams before they can go back into the wild. He's only 200 grams, so he has a bit to go yet.
Okay, how many spines then would a normal hedgehog have?
About 5,000. Yeah, so he's got nice, healthy, thick spines there. Sometimes they do have things like ringworm, or they're a bit balder. We see lots of different kind of parasites on them. So around this time of the year, a common thing that we see is kind of skinny, dehydrated juveniles. A lot of the time they have got a lot of intestinal parasites.
Yeah, they're also, I believe, great swimmers. So they're great runners, they're great swimmers. They're actually like triathletes, right?
Yeah, a bit of everything.
And good climbers as well, I believe.
They can do everything, little.
Now, tell us about then, obviously, Pierce mentioned not to feed them milk. So what would you feed them if you have them in your garden?
So you can feed them cat food, that dry food or wet food. They tend to like crunching away on that. But, you know, themselves, they'll eat insects. That's kind of their natural diet.
Now, I believe hedgehogs have quite poor eyesight, right?
They do, yeah. So they rely mainly on their sense of smell to find the food that they need to eat in the wild.
And obviously they are nocturnal.
Yes, they come out at night time.
Yeah, and how many have you got here then in the sanctuary itself?
We probably have about 40 at the moment. So a lot of the juveniles are kind of eventually getting to the weight where they can be released. They've been here, you know, during the summer.
And the plan is obviously then to release them back into the wild.
Exactly, yeah. So they'll go out to outdoor runs to kind of acclimatise to being outside. And then once they're ready, once they're the correct weight, we've done health checks and everything is good, then they'll go out.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Fiona. All right, Pierce, we're going to finish up with a live little rescue here. And, I mean, this is a big issue for hedgehogs,
This
right?
is a huge issue. We find hedgehogs that have fallen down into drains simply because the drain cover wasn't on. So at home, make sure these cost about €2. And what happens is when a hedgehog goes in there, it's a race against time for us as volunteers because they're often filling up with water. If it starts to rain, there's maybe some food grease and everything in there.
So they could potentially drown?
They absolutely will drown in there. And their spines are like Velcro. They get more and more stuck. And so then we have to come along, and it's very difficult sometimes. You've got as many spines as you can. You wedge them out. You're always wearing gloves whenever you're handling wildlife. Scoop them up. And there's our hedgehog. And then he'll go to Kildare Wildlife Rescue for rehabilitation and then released back into the wild.
And this is a stuffed little teddy, by the way. This isn't
teddy.
a real one.
But honestly,
you were
cover
telling
your
me
drains.
to cover the drains.
Cover the drains. Cover the drains and slow down on the road. That's the best thing you can do to help hedgehogs. And also, if you've got walls in your garden or fences, if you can make sure there's space for them to go between gardens, because that's something that's worked very well in the UK. They're called hedgehog highways, and it lets hedgehogs go around and meet each other, obviously, which they need to do to breed. And so, yeah, basically open up your garden and keep it natural.
Okay, where can we find out more online?
Kildare Wildlife Rescue, and we're selling our calendars, so please support the work that we do by buying a calendar.
Absolutely. Okay, Pierce and Fiona here down at Grey Abbey in County Kildare. Hope you learned lots about hedgehogs here this morning. Back to you in the studio in Dublin. Right, this little fella's gorgeous.
Thank you so
isn't he?
much, Deric. He's mad about that teddy bear.
In the drains, getting caught in the drains.
The tongs.
There we go. Always have
Well
kitchen.
done,
Now, thank you, Derek. Coming up, Colin Baker has the newest gadgets on the market.
Yes, from earphones to smartwatches, he's got us covered.
See you back here very shortly.
You're very welcome back. Now, last month, Apple launched a whole range of new products with a lot of new AI features.
Here to show us some of these new releases and some budget-friendly alternatives is our gadget guy, Colin Baker. Good morning.
Good morning.
Colin.
Hey, Colin.
Colin.
I'll just change my name.
We're going to start with the Apple iPhone now. So this is the new Apple iPhone.
I mean, are you
16.
excited? Were you excited with the latest
Didn't
launch?
know it even
Didn't
came
even
out.
know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, right. Well, you're honest at least. I was, and if you're a nerd like me, you will be.
But why were you excited?
Well, look, incrementally, obviously, short of there being a coffee spout on the new iPhone, what are people going to get excited about? There's just incremental improvements over time. We're now onto iPhone 16. The battery is somewhat better. Most users are reporting 20 to 30% improvement in battery, which is a bit of a game changer.
Until the 17 comes out.
And then hopefully it's better again. But there's not been huge change in that over the past 5 years.
Well,
So
is
that's
it true,
that's a
though,
good
that once you do the upgrades, then the battery life seems to start to go?
To some extent, as upgrades come about, more is demanded of them. The latest, I mean, we're going to be seeing Apple AI over the next few months. So that's going to take so much more processor power and obviously give you a shorter battery life. So that happens over time anyway. We use them more and they're just more demanding of their batteries.
So what are the main features? There's a magnifying feature on one of them, is there?
Look, so this is the iPhone 16 Pro Max. This is the Pro Regular. Now, we'll just take this off here and you might see it. For starters, I'm just going to show you the one key physical difference is the fact that you've got this, I'm not allowed to call it a button, but it is a button. It's the Apple camera control. And it's just instead of going into your shortcuts or your apps to get to your camera, it saves that couple of seconds to get you onto the camera straight in. But also you've got the fact that this is a slider as well. So in terms of zooming in and out, you can do that straight up on here as well. You've also got the ability to hang on my cameras in the way. Hang on, I'll see if I can get that right.
Okay, so we'll take your word. There we go. Look at that.
See? So you've also got the fact that there's a little tiny double click on there and you can activate other features like tone, resolution, frame rate, and video versus taking pictures, all right on that button as well.
So for young people, particularly who are obsessed with like Snapchat and taking pictures and videos of everything,
do you know
this
what?
is
For
a feature
anyone who
for
likes
them.
taking photos, look, the latest iPhone 16s are the best cameras yet, and the Pro versions are better again. So they really are an alternative to professional,
but they're already
low-level professional.
Exactly.
Where's the magnifying feature?
Magnifiers. A lot of people don't realise some of the assistive technologies that iPhone have. I don't know if you can see it on camera here, but when you pull down and search for magnifier on any iPhone, you get a little magnifier app. And it's very much just like a magnifying glass. Now, on the latest iPhone 16s, it uses its lenses and LiDAR to get really close. So if you have trouble reading menus or anything like that, look at how close you can get to the text. You've also got the activator for the torch within there as well. And you've also got a thing called detect. So with this, not only will it... Wait till you say now. Will it tell you?
Person 1 meter. Person 0.5 meters.
It'll actually read off text. It'll tell you what's in front of you. So in terms of... I'll turn that off. It's getting very loud and annoying.
So it's telling you there's somebody right beside you.
Yes, and if you're visually impaired, this could be a real advantage. It has furniture detect. It'll read out text on a menu.
How much?
Well, the iPhones are always expensive. They start, as you might know, at about €1,200, €1,239 for the basic iPhone 16 and go right the way up to just over €2,000 for the Pro Max 1 terabyte. So they're expensive.
Say if you had the other one,
you know what? It won't stop millions of people going out to buy them.
But can you trade it in and get the upgrade?
Yeah, there is trade-in options in stores like Select and that. You can go in and they'll give you a price on your own one. And so you can get a certain trade-in value and then be aware that you're going back into the circular economy there, so it's getting reused.
Okay, so lots of different features that magnifying.
Is it worth it? Magnifiers on all the iPhones. The camera's getting better, the battery's getting better. If you love your iPhone and if you're totally addicted to it, it is part of life.
Let's move on to AirPods. We're seeing everybody with these in their ears all the time.
The major kind of upgrade to AirPods is that the regular, cheaper AirPods, so these sub €200 AirPods, the AirPod 4s, are now noise cancelling. So you only got that on the AirPod Pros before, which were over €200. And if you haven't felt the experience of noise cancelling, I think you guys have, it deadens all that noise around you.
Particularly if you're on a plane.
Totally. Fantastic on planes and on trains and anywhere you just need to cancel out that bustle around you. There's also a mention for the AirPod Pro 2s. Again, back to the assistive technology, for people who have sort of mild to moderate hearing loss, obviously hearing aids are a great advantage and they've improved in technology over the years, but they're well over $1,000. I don't know if you've ever seen this. A friend of mine just spent €3,000 on a set of hearing aids.
Yeah, but that's hardly an alternative now for it.
What they've now done is they've deployed a release which is clinical grade hearing aid technology built into the AirPods.
So it can do the same job, but you don't want to be having these AirPods in your ears.
Well, maybe you do.
Well,
I don't know if there's a stigma to
I think that there's I know Warren was saying that you can get a build-up of gunk or whatever else.
On all of them.
Not bad for your...
On hearing aids as well as on... But these are €259, I think it is, versus maybe €2,000 or €3,000. So there's a big difference there. And maybe there's a stigma too. I think I'd prefer to have AirPods at this stage in rather than a hearing aid.
I don't know. Look at that. That's something that you'd have to go and get
of course,
professional advice on.
But it genuinely does. It has a 5-minute hearing test, and this is clinically approved. Fairness to Apple, I don't like to give them too much credit.
Let's move on to the budget-friendly ones.
Budget-friendly ones. These are the EarPod Pros. Look, there's a lot of devices like this that are, we'll say, inspired by Apple.
So these are about
designs.
$199. These are $39.
Well, actually, €259 for the AirPod Pro variant, and these are €39. Are they as good as the AirPod Pros? No, they are not. Are they worth €39? Absolutely. On these ones, you've got a full touchscreen on the front, which gives you access. You've actually got a touchscreen on the front. That gives you access to the multimedia controls, play, pause, etc. There's a built-in timer, alarm clock on there, and little controls for your camera on your phone,
Who cares
too.
with that?
Look,
Do they work?
Some people like those additional features. People like me. And they're only €39. And it has the noise cancelling as well.
Oh, it does? OK.
At €39.
Well, that's very
so,
good,
look,
then.
Apple have
led
the charge.
Can I just ask you about charging them? This is the problem. You have to keep charging them.
Well, the latest ones, the latest AirPod 4s are talking about 30 hours of use. Now, on these A9s at €39, you're probably only getting 10 or 12 hours.
Let's move on to the Apple Watch.
The Apple Watch, look, this is the new Apple Watch 10. Again, I don't know if you can see it on the camera there.
Just keep it there.
What they've done this time around, it's the 10th generation watch, and they've only been out for like 8 or 9 years. But they've got a larger screen on them now, longer battery life. I'm getting about 3 to 4 days. And you've got better sensors. Back to this medical assistance thing, you've got the fact that they've got a fall alert built into them. So you've an SOS feature. If you fall and it detects that you've fallen and you don't move for 60 seconds, not only will it call medical services, emergency services, it'll send them your location as well. So very, very clever feature. You've also got improved wellness features. So doctors and medical specialists are now using the sensors on this in kind of post-heart operations to detect...
All right. If people have problems,
exactly.
There is a cheaper alternative?
There is, yeah. The Urban 4 is only €69. Again, looks very similar, very much inspired by the Apple Watch. Is it as good as the Apple Watch? Does it have all those apps? No, it doesn't. Again, is it worth €69 versus these are about, they start at about €450.
Colin,
well worth the price.
Thank you very much. There you go with the Apple updates. Backfromthefuture.com if you want to find out any more about that. Colin Baker, as always, great to have you with us.
That's all we've got time for today. Miriam, what's coming up tomorrow?
Coming up on tomorrow's Ireland AM, finance guru Owen McGee will be giving us the latest on the changes in inheritance tax.
And Brendan Courtney will be dropping by for a chat.
Fabulous.
We're also going to be hearing from lawyer to the stars, Paul Tweed.
Tomorrow
from 7.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.